a loud voice. And the second important quality that nobody has is to delegate to the editor the certain decisions, and directors have problems with that. So that's why half of directors edit themselves, and half that are smart and want to leave home, they find the editors that they can work with. So today we have the panel that consists of editors that work for themselves and that work for other people. Let me introduce our panel. I will start with myself. So I'm Julia Ivanova. I'm co-chair of DocBC, and I'm from Vancouver. And I started about 12 years ago, and I worked with an editor, several editors. And I think that the role of the editors in my career was immensely important because they made the films that elevated me to a certain level. But I always had an eye, and I always wanted to do it myself. So eventually, because of the restraint with money, I started to edit myself. And I gradually moved to editing everything myself, but it doesn't mean that it is something that I think is the best thing for the film. So, at first I will introduce our panelists, but then I will talk a little bit about the Sundance Editing and Story Lab and the formula, what it gives to filmmakers. So our first guest is Anna Rossignol, and she is from Paris, but initially from Egypt, and she made a film, I Am the People, that is shown here. It is her first documentary, and it is very interesting that we have the first-time filmmaker on our panel. And some of you maybe will go and watch her film tomorrow and explain.
Maybe.
For sure, yeah. And that's what I was going to say, that I strongly recommend, for many reasons, for you to go tomorrow and watch this film, because this is an exceptional film made by the first-time filmmaker. The second person is Stan Newman, and Stan Newman made his first film in 1989 as a director, and before that he worked as an editor for many years. So now Stan has it all. He edits smaller projects himself, and he edits bigger films that he is directing with one editor. And of course we will ask this question: what qualities make it possible for them to work together? Then we have Carmen. Carmen is our local editor who did a lot of interesting films, made a lot of interesting films, and especially I would say that she edited the film Dirt. That was a very successful. Then it wasn't Crazy Water. How was it? Crazy Water. Crazy, yeah, Crazy Water, and Citizen Sam, that maybe you heard about. And right now, very soon, we will see the film that was just finished by NFB. It is in the final process, and it is a very important film for NFB, and it's called Ninth Floor. Most likely it will be premiering soon, and most likely at TIFF. So this film was directed by Mina Shu, our very acclaimed local director. Rafi Spivak is the editor also in Vancouver, and Rafi is responsible for the whole generation of filmmakers that are entering our work for, of course, because Rafi has been teaching at UBC for many years at the film program, and so teaching editing and filmmaking and all things around that. And also Rafi edited interesting, important films in British Columbia, and also Rafi worked in the scripted format with series, so he has tapped in everything that is out there, all different formats, and it's very difficult to combine a fresh look when you mix different formats. And right now, Rafi decided to go back to making his own documentaries and concentrating actually on personal and creative, artistic, experimental documentaries. After making so many works, so many films and series in more scripted form. So this is our panel, and so editors, I think, are people who like solitude. By definition, darkness, solitude, and this is important quality for filmmaker, and patience, right? So repetition. True? Yes. So Sundance came up with an interesting formula maybe several years ago, and it has proved to be very successful. 4 filmmakers who have 4 directors and 4 editors, so 4 films, are chosen for the lab. It means that the film and director and editor would live for a week in a very close-knit sort of community, and the festival invites mentors to be with them, and the films are shown. At first, the rough cut is shown. Everybody watches the rough cut, and then the mentors are giving their opinions, what should be done, how it should be changed, and then within a week, the team is working on one part of the documentary, about 10-15 minutes part, and that's where they implement the changes that they agree on together with the mentors. And then at the end, they're looking at it and how it works, and they can reject the suggestions or they can accept suggestions. The first-time filmmakers quite often reject suggestions, and that's quite often what sinks the films that are made by the first-time filmmakers in a way, because our instinct is to say no. So with time, you learn actually to say maybe. And maybe some people learn to say yes, but it's not necessarily the best thing. So this 1 week gives intense environment where people get out their own vision, and they broaden their horizons of the topic that they are showing in the documentary. So today we will try, in a way, to be not exactly like in the lab, but we will be like mentors. But the good thing about this lab is that for the next round, mentors can come with their films, and those who were their kind of students, they become their mentors. So this kind of evolution and change of the role is important, because there shouldn't be any authorities that is unquestioned in our field. So I would like to start then with talking about the craft and the art, and if I may, I will ask people here at our table why they continue to work in documentaries as editors. Because, for example, Rafik, he also works in the narrative fiction, because he edited Drew Sweeney's 3 films. So what is it about documentaries that is appealing for an editor? Let's start with
Sure, yeah. Well, the role of the editor in documentary fiction is completely different, I find. There is no script. I find in general documentary form is completely open. And it's a very sort of post-production focused process. I find in my own films and also in a lot of the films that I shoot, the production stage is often a collecting stage. And you come with a lot of stuff.
Could you speak a little bit louder?
Louder? Absolutely I can. No, I can do without a mic. So I find that the production stage is often a collecting stage, and so once we get to post-production and editing, everything is open. Not only the story is open, the characters are undecided, but also the form itself. What kind of documentary are we doing? What is the approach? Are we using narration, interviews, etc.? Even if they've been available, it still is unclear whether they're going to make it or not. So it's a completely open form. And the role of the editor is is the role of a co-creator, of a true collaborator, whereas in fiction it's completely different, though the role is extremely important, and especially in the sense that in fiction an editor can really damage the film. So you have that responsibility, but you're not always able to make the film necessarily. Whereas in documentary, the feeling is that no matter what is there, there is an opportunity for you to still make the film. So that's why I love it. It's just like a completely open and creative position.
So working with a director, I will ask you, Carmen. So working with a director, you're a co-creator. So do you sometimes butt heads in the vision for the film and how to navigate this very delicate minefield?
Right. Well, it depends on the director, of course, and it depends on the chemistry between the director and the editor. I've certainly been in situations where I'm working with a director who's actually told me from the start that she likes to spar and she wants to have to be in the edit room. And of course, if both the director and the editor are capable of doing that in a productive way, it actually can improve the film because you have a more objective view. Although I would still argue that there's everything is subjective because we put our own perception on whatever it is. So you can get into the argument that there's no truth in documentary, regardless of how hard we try. But at least the editor has an opportunity to come to the material without any preconceived notions. We weren't there in the gathering of it, and so we don't have sort of the backstory as to how that material came to be, and we can, give the director a different perspective, and it's not necessarily the better perspective, but it's certainly, there are times where you can have, where it's important to speak up as an editor and not just, do what you're told, but to actually suggest things and to try things and to offer those suggestions, knowing that ultimately it's the director's film and it's the producer's film, but your job is to help make the best film possible.
So if over the first week you start to feel that you are here just to do technical work and they tell you how they want it, how the editor can maintain the goodwill to actually give the ideas? If you give ideas and they say no, and within a week, you understand you're here, so they can sabotage this partnership subconscious because they don't want to delegate the power.
Yeah.
They want a good film. And they think that they give you the chance to be creative, but in fact they don't give you anything. So you become kind of a technical machine. So how is it? Because you both work for hire quite often. So has it happened? And then how it affects your creativity? And does it really kill the film?
Well, I mean, in true documentary, even in TV documentary, I was never in that situation. However, I work a lot in documentary series, which is another name for reality shows and stuff like that, where we are all working for somebody else. There is usually not a director even, there's a showrunner and there's a story. We're all working for the broadcaster, really. And there the notes, they come sort of very harsh and you have no choice. And I mean, you kind of operate under this kind of atmosphere of you become subservient to somebody else. It's very difficult to make. I find it's for me it's very difficult. As an editor, you have to trust your instincts. If you have to trust somebody else's instincts, who's in a different room or in a different city or in a different country, that is very difficult. You do it, but I don't find that it's an extremely creative process. However, entertainment is also something that seems to be very measurable. So you're trying to create perhaps not the most creative thing, but the most entertaining thing. And it's about who knows the audience. The truth is nobody knows the audience, really. But you know, the broadcaster claims that they know their audience, and so you do what you're told. I'm also a graduate of the Israeli army, so I'm very familiar with doing what I'm told.
I wanted then to ask Stan, because of course, Stan has made, in comparison with us, so many films that your experience is endless in this regard. So, and both as an editor and the director. So
It's
what?
a long experience of editing. So I first I will come back to two things which I said. First about the.
Sorry, excuse me?
Yeah, sorry.
Yes.
About the idea of an editing workshop when we take films in the process of editing and we put together for 1 week. We did the same experiment with Wenger Film Lab in Amsterdam 10 years ago, and what I found very moving at this moment, it was not the question of the results, but suddenly the directors and the editors, because they came in teams, discovered that what they thought were their own failure, their own problems with the film, their own film, was in fact a normal problem of the editing process of a documentary film. So suddenly, the editing room is very often a place of guilt. Because this is the moment when the director cannot say anymore, it will be beautiful, it will be great. It speaks or it doesn't speak. And it's psychologically, it's very difficult for a director to be suddenly, when he's shooting, he's the king of the world, and suddenly,
I've often felt like I need a degree in psychology to do my job.
But just when you put the different films in the editing process together, you discover suddenly that the problems are common. They are normal problems of the editing of a documentary film, and suddenly it creates. It doesn't solve the problems, but at least you see them in the right perspective. And the second thing I would like to say is that I don't completely agree with you about the creativity. Because what I have learned, at least in my own experience, is that in fact, films are done when you shoot them. Films are done when you are filming. Okay? And for me, the editing process has a very important role, but the creative possibility of editing is in fact limited. For me, it's more a kind of experiment in reading. If you can read what has been really inscribed in this material, if you can find the reality of what has been done, you do the proper editor's job. But you cannot create something which has not happened during the shooting or during the invention of the film. Okay? And I think that today we have this tendency, because of the tools we use, to consider that, as you said, the shooting is collection and the editing is creation, elaboration. And I think it's a dangerous position, because the practical result of that is that you shoot too much, you can't even see what you have done. And then when you start editing, you have no control at all on your material. And for me, the whole process of the fabrication of the film is a process when you take decision at each step. And if you decide to shoot less, if you take more decisions when shooting, the editing can move much further. So, probably very basic things I have learned. You know, each film you think that it will be easier, that you have learned something from the film before, and no way.
Anna, so that was your first film. So how much material did you shoot, and how did you deal with the material as a first-time filmmaker? Because we have many first-time filmmakers in the audience.
Yeah, I made what Stan says we should make. So I shot a lot more than I should have. But it's not just because it was my first movie. I think it was also because I was shooting events, political events, and I didn't know what was going to happen. So I was in Egypt, so it's in Egypt, and I was following the revolution. And when I say revolution, it's not the 18 days that's down the barrel. It's the deep political process that began in January 2011, and in Egypt. And so I shot a lot. I had 350 hours.
This is quite often the case. It's not excessive. Absolutely.
How can you see 300 hours of
Oh, you can.
Slowly.
You cannot see, you cannot work on it. This is my point of view. It escapes all
But we know the day we don't take the camera is the day when everything it's been proven. We have to take it.
So, you know, we say documentary as if it means one thing.
Sure.
And I look at your two films, they don't fall under the same category at all. Yours is a very beautiful, poetic, constructed film that is constructed based on a literary work, whereas yours is a more personal. It's about the people. Like I was thinking about the opening of your film, that starts with a woman in the field that basically rejects to be filmed or doesn't want to be filmed. There's no way that you planned this as an opening of your film. I'm sure that this was never conceived as an opening. Or could have even.
So Anna, what would you say in terms of your role in this film, in your editor's role?
So when I shot, I was alone. When I shot, I was alone, completely alone. I spent a lot of time in the countryside, alone, 3 years, and it was very important for me to find somebody to be an eye on this work because I was very alone and I was feeling very alone, and it was very important. But I was always with the editor. Always.
You were always sitting with the editor in the
During the 30 weeks that we took to for the
30
editing, yes, it was very long. It was on a year we edited, and I was always here, but because it was, I think, for bad reasons, because I wanted to be here because it was my first movie and I wanted to see what is editing and how do we construct the work, and because I speak Arabic and the editing was do not speak Arabic, so and the language is very important. The film is for me, and that's why I was always in the room.
So your editor, was it an experienced editor?
Yes.
Experienced.
Yes. Because two beginners. No.
You think
No,
no,
but-
because you wouldn't trust each other.
Yes, but I don't trust them.
This is a real
And
director.
I can trust the editor, but I won't in the future and now and in the future trust the producers. It was very, no, because it's you have the filmmaker, the editor, and the producers. It's kind of a triangle stuff. And the work with the producers is difficult.
Yeah.
But I agree with Stan about the shooting. I won't. No. I won't make that again. I learned that it's not good to shoot so much because after you are lost in so many possibilities, and it was very difficult to choose how to construct.
So if we are making a film based on cinema verite principle, right, then you have all the material. I find it beneficial if actually I edit the beginning of the film within the first half a year that I start filming. If I have the beginning of the film, I get this clarity of where I'm going and who the subject is, what's happening, then it's easier. So what would you think about such approach to edit in chunks this way?
So we used to do it very often in the 90s. And then we stopped.
What changed?
Then we stopped because I did it on two of my or three my big films, and then we stopped because I realized, for me, it's very personal feeling, that as long as I don't have the whole material, I am unable to understand the real outline of the film. So I am unable to build it for real. It's too open. And for me, the editing process is a process of construction. One part of the process is the construction, and the other part is just to understand what's the real outline of the film, what's the real form, specific form of the film. And if you don't have half of the material, for me, in fact, it was always a loss of time. So we stopped to do it. We were very dogmatic about it. We called it le va-et-vient between editing room and shooting. No? But I don't believe in it anymore.
Va-et-vient?
What's the French word? Va-et-vient entre le tournage et le montage.
Mm-hmm. So even if it is a film about a person, even if it is centered around not the issue but someone.
Yeah, you know, I have a very, let's say, old school position.
Mm-hmm.
I think that you can, if you want to start to edit the material you have already shot, do it in your head. You don't need to do it for real when you can't do it until the end. So you can imagine, when I go in the editing room, before I have dreamed the articulation with the shots, once they have been shot. You don't need, this is the tendency today with the tools we have always. It's so easy just to play with it, you know. And okay, if you want to edit when the film is not completely shot, do it on paper, do it with memory, dream the film, and then you edit. It's a very classical, old school.
Yeah. But I've only seen one of your films, but it was very highly constructed. So do you still feel like that's an important approach to say a very cinema verite approach?
Yeah, I'm not a cinema verite
Right. Yeah.
but I have edited many films, and a long time ago I also worked with this kind of material. But for me, you know, the only difference is that with the kind of film I do today, I write them very much before. And I think that the building of the film in the documentary process, when you have direct shooting material, the building of the structure happens more in the editing room. But it's more like the part of the screenwriter, in fact, not the director, but the screenwriter. And when you say that the first scene of Anne was not shot for the beginning, it's very often the case. But what happens always very often is that you shoot something for the end, and it will be the beginning. It means that you have already understood that some parts are very specific. They can be just in the middle of the film. And end and beginning are easy to.
So since we're talking about ending and beginning, I would like us to stay on this topic of ending and beginning, because those are the most important things. How it ends is what will be the impression your film leaves, and how you start will determine the whole flow of the attitude to your film. So the beginning of the film, what do you feel more challenging as an editor? To find the material, so you're given material by the director. How often people come knowing that this I want to be my beginning, this I want to be the ending, or you're told to find it, and how difficult it is?
Yeah, well, every like that. You asked me about what I find in documentary editing is that every film is completely different. It's a new mountain to climb, and so some films are chronological in nature, and so the beginning is around somewhere in the beginning of the story. Other films come, for the most part, I have to find it. I don't know if I've ever been given a concrete scene to start with. And you know, I think like you, what Anna said kind of echoes my experience working with you a little bit. Is like some directors like to be there, they're very hands-on, and in some way have the skills really to be an editor, as you've proven later in your career. Other people are very afraid of the material. It's, you know, you have 200 hours in your bag, it's very scary, and so often I'm handed the footage and we'll see you in 2 weeks and good luck and see what you've got. And then again and again and again like that, and then you have to find it, and I find that to me to have an opening is very helpful, and it's often solves the film, but it happens about 50%, or about 50% of the films I'm actually able to find it around the beginning of editing. In about half the films, I'm not able to find the opening till much, much later, and you can't really, there are two types of processes. You could go, like Stan said, a construction. So the process is selecting a block and the next block, etc. But there's also, with more difficult films that are not so obvious, there's also kind of a reductive process that you can engage in, at least in the beginning. You could say, I like this not so much, and you kind of throw stuff out. So that's a different type of approach to make it more manageable. And so often when a film is not so clear, that's what you do. You start with reduction. You have, you have a room full of beads, and somebody says, you've got to make the best bracelet possible. There's one bracelet that is the best out of the million beads, and you just start by going, these I don't like so much, these I don't like, these maybe, and you kind of arrange them into piles like that. So sometimes it's not a fun process, but sometimes there is some reductive process that you engage in to begin.
That's really fun, actually.
You like that?
Yes, I always edit like that. I edit by scenes, and it is always like that. I love this, I am editing this one. So eventually, it's already 2 hours. all the things I like is already 2 hours. So what to do now? This is the best way.
So I'm saying throwing stuff out is not fun. Just going and throwing the ones you don't like. That's kind of not so fun.
Well, I find, most generally speaking, I try and avoid the beginning until the end. But sometimes I'll be working with a director who really needs to know what the beginning is before they can go along the journey of finding the structure together. So, and in those cases, I often will help craft a beginning. But I don't get too invested in it, because I know that I would say 8 times out of 10 that the beginning disappears and it ends up on the floor. So it's finding a way of keeping everyone comfortable with the process and collaborating in a way where the director can see what their film is, but knowing that like you say, the beginning and the ending is so important, and arguably the beginning is the most important, because if you lose people at the beginning, you've lost them. They won't engage in the film, and they won't, especially engage emotionally in the film, which is the most important part of the journey. So I always find that the end, and it's also with getting into fine tuning and fine cutting. I never fine cut the beginning until near the end of the process, because I want to stay really fresh with that material, and I want to make sure that I haven't exhausted my creative process with that material before I know what the whole film is, what's going to stay and what's going to go, and whether that beginning is actually in fact going to shift and it's going to become the end or become somewhere else in the film, in which case it's going to have to evolve as well. So because when you move a scene, the scene changes. Right? The scene often becomes about something else. And so staying as open as possible around the beginnings and the ends, I think, is really helpful.
Stan, so you work with one editor, right? So what qualities make it possible?
First, we must not forget that it's also a technical job. So the first quality is to be able to manipulate images and sound easily.
Yeah, you know, these young people, they all can do it.
Yeah.
Very frustrating.
And this is really the first thing. And then there are two things I want from the people who work with me in the editing group. The first is that three things. They must understand what we are trying to achieve.
So the vision, do you tell them and they
No,
before you start?
we must have a basic agreement about what film is about. Not this film, but what the film process is about. We must share that. If we don't share that, nothing is possible. Okay? If somebody tries to edit my film, like a clip, for instance, I can. And so, the second thing, I ask them to be very, very free in their creative, imaginative process.
So you give them.
Not to try, because many editors try just to put the lid on the film, very quickly, because it's difficult, there are problems. So let's make it work. How many times you hear that? I will do that, it will work. And so this I hate. I don't want it to work. I want it to be a. And the last thing, I need people who are very, very stubborn.
Stubborn.
Because
We can work.
they must be able to resist and keep always their own point of view, because otherwise it's useless. And as I'm a former editor, I'm able, editing room is also a place where you lie very much. You have all kinds, it's like a lawyer, American lawyer, You are able to sell anything. So you must work with people who are able to not to be impressed by that. So this is
But if they are stubborn and you are stubborn, so that's a delicate thing.
it's always tense, It's a work. It's not supposed to be easy.
Yeah. So do you walk out sometimes, like for example, do you have an argument and the editor would say, "That's it, I'm done with it,
No,
out."
Because I have the editor's training, I'm always trying to understand what is being said to me. I'm always trying to imagine that I am wrong.
Oh, yes, very important.
Yeah, sure. This is also the main problem of directors. They see things which doesn't exist.
Yes.
They see what they saw in their head.
Yes.
Yeah, and they are unable sometimes to check the reality of it in the actual material. And me too. How many times do I say to my editor, I shot this thing? And she tells me, no. And we spend one day just looking for the shot,
Actually, I've heard from many experienced editors that this is a very common problem with directors. That we think we shot, but we didn't because we shot it badly.
That
Something
in
like
a
that.
more general way, we think that what we have done is obvious.
Of course.
What we have done is obvious, that everybody can see what we think we have put in the shot.
Yes.
And it's not true. And the editor, one of the main job of the editor is just to check it, to say it's here or it's not. You think this shot shows the door? No, it shows the window. And
Or whether the emotion coming from the character is actually coming from the character, or whether the director just wanted it to come from the character. And is there something we can do to contextualize it differently so that that emotion does come out? And that's
You can throw the music.
last resort.
No, I know.
And it's the last thing I would say about the beginning and the end. My experience is we have a tendency to start always the beginning a little bit too early and finish the film a little bit too late. So when I work on the beginnings and on the ends, I have always the sentence of Goldman, the screenwriter of Little Big Man, we say the best moment to start a scene is as late as possible, and the best moment to end it is as soon as possible. And for the beginning and the end, it's interesting. It's not a rule; it's just a warning. Let's say.
That's very important.
We start and we start and we start and we start and.
So let's say you're taking a scene. Do you edit it in a long way, and then when you put things together, you chop
Yeah,
the beginning and the
I
end? Like,
always start
have
with
the long
what I call mud, piece of mud.
mud.
Clay, just putting the thin lines out, and just to see the shape.
And how do you work? How do you work with scenes, for example? Do you make them long at first, and then you tighten them up? How?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, you're gathering the material, organizing the material by character, theme, and various plot points. And then from that, you start to, like for me, anyways, if say I'm working on a Verite film that isn't very constructive, it isn't at all scripted. It's finding what the essence is of that scene by looking at it, studying the rushes, and then working with it and working loosely, but at the same time have a sense of where you're going. Otherwise, it can just be this sort of muddy mess, right? So I agree. You're starting with the clay and you're slowly carving into it, but there's all sorts of chunks of that clay that never should make it in that scene to begin with. And then there's the crafting of, and typically a scene ends up getting cut down at least by a third of its length, through the process, and you want to keep it fat at first and see how it works within the entire structure of the film before you start throwing things away, because it's really easy to forget what you've thrown away.
Yes.
So.
Okay. I have a question about the importance of words versus importance of visuals, because I notice quite often that the filmmakers, when they start, things are loaded with words. I have a feeling that words are not important, not at all, but what we remember about the film is not the words but the visuals. So how you work with words and visuals and the value you give to both parts, let's say, fools.
Yeah, I'm a very bad example because my films are almost all made with voiceover. And they are based on an interplay between images, sounds, and text. And for me, those words are very important. But it's a very specific position.
Mm-hmm.
When I started, the voiceover was still considered as something shameful.
Yeah, I remember.
In the 90s. So I'm not that field.
What about you?
I don't know because it's my first film, but it's I spoke about language. For me, in this film, it's very important, and the translation is very important. So we worked a lot on the translation. Maybe the English translation is not so good as the French. I'm sorry, because I made the French one, and it was very important. No, because the language, for me, the richness of the language is a very huge part of the interactions. So if you have a very efficient translation like this, you have only the information and not the way people speak. It's not good. So it was very, very, very important for me to have this work on the translation to be able to feel this, the way the images that the people use in their words or sentences.
But would you edit around the visual content or around the audio content? Like, this is a question that is interesting.
I'm wondering if your question is more about exposition versus action, because, like in your film, the character, the words are important, but they're part of the character, right? And the building of the character and the emotion. Whereas if you have a voiceover that's just telling us what we're supposed to, like telling us that that the sky is blue instead of showing us that the sky is blue. And so in that, from that perspective, it's really important to remember that cinema is, you know, there's a lingua franca of cinema that is visual and not exposition and literal.
But I think Julia's asking about strategy, like what is,
Yes.
strategically I find that it's less important to decide what you like better and what's the drivers, but it's more important to recognize what it is. For me, it's about moments, and so the moment could be verbal or the moment could be visual, and you build up around that. And if the moment is primarily verbal, then the visual support it. If the moment is primarily visual, then maybe the words support that. And then, but the moment you recognize that, you have kind of an idea of what strategy you should use to build the scene. And sometimes when I recognize that here is the moment of the scene and I'm building to that and it's all about words, sometimes I cut the dialogue without cutting the images altogether. I just cut the words and I listen. I turn my head off the screen and I listen. And I want it to sound. In other parts, it's completely the opposite, where the moment is completely visual, and then you kind of construct that first, and then you put some words underneath. So it's not a rule of thumb. It's more recognizing what you have. Like this morning, I was cutting a scene from this documentary, and it was a scene about this dentist who closes his clinic after 50 years working in the same building. And it's 10 tapes, it's about 10 hours, and it eventually ends up being cut into an 8-minute scene so far.
10 hours into 8.
Yes, 10 hours into 8 minutes, it's a reasonable ratio. And well, it's got a lot of stuff. Well, he's a dentist after all, where it's not like a stripper terminating your practice. I don't know. It's not that exciting, but anyway. The moment there is, and he has a hard time connecting to the magnitude of the moment, of closing the practice. It really is a monumental moment in his life. He had one practice in that location, one career, that is it. And the whole moment is about his inability to connect to that emotional place in that moment. So, and it's manifests itself in this one kind of line where he's trying to think about it on a deeper level, but it's too painful, I guess, so he's unable to connect. And so I cut that, the words around it, and then there's this beautiful shot of him alone after the dental chair has been removed, and he's standing alone in the empty room, and he looks around out the window and he just turns and walks. And so they kind of work together. There is the verbal moment where the emotional impact is created, and the visual serves as a more of a release for us, maybe the release that he couldn't achieve. So
what is interesting is that you can have the verb also inside the shot. You have the shot with dialogue, the character is saying something, and then there is a moment of gesture and so on, and for you it's the whole. And very often you make the experiment to cut the words or to cut the action, and something completely different appears, which can be very strong. And not just you were analyzing the shot as the shot where the guy says hi, and you cut the hi, and you have something fantastic, just because you took off the one part of the material. It's always about taking the shot for what it is, where it is stronger.
You wanted to ask a question.
Well, I've seen Austerlitz, and this is a great discussion. This is what I was really hoping for, this kind of hashing out of these issues around the language of editing. And one of the things, what you said about, the exposition is the thing to avoid, made tremendous sense. And in Stan's Austerlitz, which is a wonderful film, there's a moment that embodies this, where you take the text, you take what's being said, and you combine it with images that don't repeat what the text is saying, to synthesize, to create a new meaning that you could only get through film. And maybe Stan would talk about the moment in the film, which to me was so brilliant, where you have the stack of photographs, he's sorting through his past, trying to understand his history. and suddenly the photographs which were flat are in a pile, and he pulls out a photo from in the pile and another one from below, and suddenly through purely pictures, like, you know, more through montage, more through the Eisenstein sort of thing you're getting at, we have this sense of how, for the character at this moment, time becomes flat. That time is suddenly, you can randomly access time from any moment. And with the voiceover going at the same time, you had this collision of a beautiful picture, you know, visual storytelling, and more in the Eisenstein tradition, with this text that is completely spins it.
But this is very interesting example because this this sequence was shot to be in the first 10 minutes of the film with a quite different purpose, and it failed because when we work we fail sometimes. And then I saw at one moment that I can read it differently, and I use it in the middle of the film. It's a typical situation in documentary editing. But the basis of that is when I shot this scene with the following of the photographs, I was very, very, I knew what I was doing. Even if the analysis of the position of the segments of in the film was wrong, I knew exactly what I wanted to achieve with the following of the picture. But I understood the real meaning of it in the film later.
You make it through.
So the film is playing today at 6 at cinema, right? 6:45. But since we mentioned Eisenstein, we should move to the topic of pacing, because Eisenstein's film failed glamorously. It was called Viva Cuba. It was filmed in Cuba. It was edited by Eisenstein, and it was premiered in Cuba. And for Cubans, the pacing of the film was completely off. It was very slow. And the film, when it was shown in Soviet Union, it was shown very little, not much, very limited distribution, because it failed in Cuba where it was shown. So they decided it's not a good film. Then it was discovered again. Was it Coppola or was it Scorsese?
Viva Mexico.
What did I say?
Cuba.
Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry, Mexico, yes. So, it's completely, sorry. And then it was rediscovered. And when you watch this film, you cannot imagine that it was basically shelved as a failure.
Yeah.
And it brings us to the topic of pacing in different countries, different cultures, and different languages. So I would say that in English and North American culture, the pacing is faster than in many other countries. If we take, for example, films that are made about Inuit culture, the pacing of life up north, what is exciting and fast for them is unbearably slow for a person who sits on the couch, let's say in Los Angeles. So how, as an editor, you deal with it? Because you have to please sort of audience in many countries. Are you consciously thinking about pacing? And let's share some tricks about pacing, like how you mix pacing, like how you work with pace of it.
Well, the cultural context, I don't have that because I have only my own sensibility. I cannot plan for anybody else's sensibility, not only in terms of pacing, but in any other way, to try and imagine how others look at the film. It's not a useful thing for me. It's difficult enough to figure out what I think about it, and it's a very intuitive process. And I have to really stay true to what I feel about it, and to maintain this initial reaction to it. And I cannot kind of pollute that with ideas of culture and like that. And therefore, maybe it's a shortcoming. I don't know. Maybe it's but.
It was more like devil's advocate, so that people are aware and raise it.
And about speed, I mean, like, just another little. I worked on this with like a little documentary series here called Eat Street about street food, where the average count is under a second. I think we counted that in no episode there was a shot that was longer than 2 seconds.
Oh my God.
So in a whole season. So I mean. And it works. It's watchable once you get used to it. You it's a very successful show. But and so I mean, but personally, that's not my pace. It's not my sensibility. I like for example, I really enjoyed the pacing in Anna's film. That was very slow. I wouldn't even say very slow. It was very. Mindful. It allowed for room. It wasn't dictating an interpretation, and I think time is a very important element in that sense. In that you allow for time for people to think about the film as they're watching it. Where here, I mean, in our culture here and in TV culture, this is absolutely forbidden. Thinking is forbidden.
Yeah, I remember I made the film in 2000 with Norman Mailer, and Mailer said something which I found very interesting. He said the pace, the very quick pace of North American films and culture was a direct result of advertising. It was the pace of advertising. So,
Yeah.
What about you in terms of pacing changing, let's say mixing pacing, that it keeps the audience, I feel that when the pace is stable, would keep the same length of shot, it becomes, people lose interest.
Yeah. Well,
Without knowing why.
Yeah, I mean, there's the element of surprise that's really important to storytelling. So I think pacing and shifting the pacing helps add to that. But also, like you said, it's just if the pacing is. I mean, one of the things, I actually cut a few segments at Eat Street. I lost weight editing that show because I was like cutting so much because like it's a physical job. But I find that there's no variation with that show. So I would argue that it's actually, I know it's successful and I actually cut a few segments, but I don't find it watchable because there isn't any variation. It's front to back, that pacing. And maybe that's why it's successful because it's doing something different. But I feel like the material is what actually dictates the pacing, and that's something that I often do after I've cut a scene or put a sequence of scenes together. Is I'll sit back and I'll turn off all the sound and I'll watch the cuts and make sure that there is a variety in terms of my length of cuts. And that I'm not kind of getting into a rhythm because it's easy to get into a rhythm. And obviously, the material is dictating it, but is there something that you want to shift in order to create and shape it and create variation?
Mm-hmm. So, may I ask you a question? When the rough cut is done, some directors show it to the audience, to the people, and to other editors. And then the input comes back to you. So do you feel like for our audience that this is something that is very important to do, to show it before going into final cut? Or relying on your own intuition is what you would recommend for the filmmakers? From your experience, as a recommendation to others?
I think it's absolutely necessary to show the film in the editing stage, because the moment you have somebody who has not belonged to the process, the moment he enters the editing room, even before the screening started, your view of your own work changes, and it's very important because the whole process is about finding what the viewer will see, what somebody who doesn't care at all about it will see. And when you show it, usually very difficult moment, at least, that the film gets much richer.
Yeah, I would say I think it's really important to test the film with an audience, and an audience that you trust, and not just other filmmakers, but people who like to watch film, or even people who don't like to watch film. And what I tend to do is sit at the back of the room, because I actually find the most valuable part of that screening process is watching the body language, and whether there's needed moments for people, or whether people are bored. I find that as valuable as the actual notes that I'm given.
No, I have a very simple rule with that. When somebody sees a film during the process of editing and says, I have not seen some of that, or I have not seen I missed this moment, or I was bored, or I fell asleep. The usual attitude is to say, no, look, and we'll show it.
It's like explaining a joke.
And my position is, I think that the viewer is always right. Then the moment when he starts to be wrong is when he starts to try to analyze what he has seen, because he doesn't know, in fact. He can say, I didn't get it, I was bored, but when he tries to explain you what you should do, you must stop listening, because he doesn't know. Because the mechanics of editing are much more complex. Usually when you get bored at one moment, something went wrong 5 minutes before. And people are unable to make this kind of work, it's not their job. So the reaction is always right, and the advice is unless you